Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. My name is Dominic Hardy. I work at the Education and Public Programs Department, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. For the third consecutive year, we have the privilege of welcoming this series of 6 lectures by Dr. François-Marc Gagnon, Director and First Chair of the Gail and Stephen Jaroslawski Institute for Studies in Canadian Art at Concordia University. We wish to acknowledge our tremendous gratitude to the university, and in particular, to Dr. Gagnon, to Rosemary Joly, the Institute Administrator, and to Lauren Lerner, Chair of the Department of Art History at Concordia, for this precious and very agreeable, I must say, collaboration. And many of you are here today are from Concordia, students there. I'd like to extend a special welcome to you in particular. François-Marc Gagnon is a much appreciated and certainly very well-known star in this museum's firmament, indeed in the firmament of Quebec and Canadian art history. For many years, one of the most respected authorities on Canadian art, as well as one of the most admired teachers in the field, he continues to hold high the standard for studies in the field by asking the most pertinent questions. And these allow us to uncover and understand contexts and preoccupations of artists in Canada. From studies on the iconography of Jacques Cartier to the landmark scholarship on Paul-Émile Bordua and the chronology of the automatiste movement for which he's responsible, from his contributions to the recent traveling exhibition devoted to Cornelius Krieghoff, organized by the AGO and seen here in Montreal at the McCord Museum, from his talks throughout the world to his countless articles which have contributed to our understanding of the passage from the modern to the contemporary in Quebec art history. I think of his contributions to the Rio Pell exhibition last summer. The generosity of Dr. Gagnon's vision and of his questioning have allowed generations of readers and students, and the two aren't exclusive, to see and think through the issues of Canadian art. He prepared an introduction last year for a book by Louise Vigneault, Identité et modernité dans l'art au Québec, and he declared in there, Il y a longtemps que je rêvais d'une seconde ou d'une troisième génération de chercheurs construisant sur les bases factuelles péniblement établies par les chercheurs de mon âge de nouveaux édifices théoriques en histoire de l'art au Québec. Or, to translate just passively, it had been a long time that I was dreaming of a second or a third generation of researchers who would build on the factual basis that we had so arduously established, the researchers of my age, some new theoretical buildings in history of art in Quebec. But actually, he is all of these generations at once, and we are lucky to watch him at work on the evolving synthesis that will help ensure, for a now mature discipline, Canadian art history, its openness and its renewal. Having explored the evolution of abstraction in Canada in his 2002 series, Dr. Gagnon invites us today, and for the next 5 weeks, to consider the problematic of realism in and around the generations of Canadian artists that are signposted by Cornelius Krieghoff on the one hand and Alex Colville on the other. Will you please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. François-Marc Gagnon.
Well, good afternoon. With an introduction like this, it better be good. Yeah, what I want to do in this series, it's to speak indeed of the realism in Canadian art. And the idea of starting with Cornelius Krieghoff imposed itself, let's say, certainly in the perspective of art history. Because as you know, this idea of calling, let's say, a trend in painting realistic or realism was first applied to Dutch art, and especially Dutch art of the let's say the middle of 16th and 17th century. And during the 19th century, when this rediscovery, let's say, of the importance of the Dutch artists of that period, there was, of course, an opposite trend, let's say, of I would call symbolist or much more interested in mythology and things like that. And this art seems to be the right thing to do, you see, to come back to reality, to forget about the idealistic view of life and all that, and in the contrary, to depict what we see. As we know now, this interpretation of Dutch art of the 17th century was not really accurate. Their main intention was not only to depict what they see around them, but also very often, as you will see, and I think it applies also in a way to Krieghoff, they were interested also very often in moralistic ideas, meaning that, okay, they depict the reality as they see it, but in order to reform it or to suggest better ways. And even if they seem to enjoy representing the defect of life and the defect of people and the bad habits, everything, there's always this kind of possibility of reform. There's only this kind of critic point of view on their surrounding. And so the first question I was asking myself, how can we situate Krieghoff, who after all was born from Dutch parents in Amsterdam. Of course, he lived all his youth in Germany, but in the north of Germany, not too far from the border of the Netherlands at the time. How could we relate him to this trend of realism as defined by Dutch art? And I thought maybe we'll take one example, and then I will try to work out a little bit how I think it should be done. This painting is called The Horse Trader, yeah? And I think the subject matter is quite evident. You have what is trade here, and you have the man with trying to be very convincing. But between the guy who will pay and him, there is the wife is there. And she seems determined not to be exploited or really to stop any bad dealing. And you have people around who are looking at it. And this kind of very anecdotal type of approach, I said, okay, how could we situate that in comparison with Dutch art, let's say, and how it can make sense in the trend? So the first thing I thought, I said, this is like a little bit like market scene. The Dutch in the middle of the 16th century have improved tremendously the agriculture. And they succeeded really to erase almost any problem of feeding of their population, even with the polders and everything. And so they were very proud of this, and their markets were very, very rich and very active, if you want. They were great financiers. So they have in their painting a represented market, and even they went as far to specialize, let's say, this representation. You will have, for instance, a fish market, and you have vegetable markets, and you have eventually even butchery and things like that. And if you take the phenomenon, let's say, at the beginning with the 16th century, this is called in French les moyens idiots manuels. Okay. And I want to just to make a short review of this type of market scene and try to see where Krieghoff could be situated. Okay, so this is my intention to start with. Let's see this example of Joachim Beuckaler, a painter of let's say this painting 1564, so middle of 16th century, who is quite typical of this first type of market scene, in which you could say the vendor or the personage who represent a peasant woman here holding a duck who doesn't seem to like it too much, you know, you see he's protesting. So pushing it on the side to give preeminence to all this variety of vegetables and fruits who are really depicted almost as an encyclopedic way. This is quite typical of this first market scene like this, to show a kind of accumulation of information and also to suggest eventually a more subtle type of content. For instance, they were making at the time a distinction between coarse vegetables and refined one. For instance, coarse vegetables, you have them. Cabbage was a typical one, carrots, turnip. Up to a point, and it's one of the most funniest title of painting I ever seen in my whole career. There was a painting in the town hall of Amsterdam, was called something like Marius Ducius Dentatus, preferring a meal of turnip to the goal of his enemy. Imagine you are a painter and you say, could you please paint this subject? It's a kind of ridiculous type of iconography. But what was the intention there? These coarse vegetables, like the turnip, like the carrots, like the cabbage, are a sign of moderation. If some people who eat this type of things are moderate people. The people who likes cauliflower, in the contrary, and you notice there's only one here, and also leafy vegetables are more refined and are more pretentious also, and are not as moderate as they should. So why to put that in the town hall of Amsterdam? Of course, to recall that this city was built on moderation, on virtue of temperance and all that, and this was a kind of opposition like that. These pictures are so accurate in terms of the depiction of the vegetable that they are almost they are used also by botanists to, for instance, to make the history of different vegetables. For instance, you notice there's no potato there. There's no, how do you call it, pepper, things like that. All these come from the America, have not really entered yet in the market. But on the other hand, you have some things that are relatively new, like carrots, like we know them, come apparently from two different kinds. One is purple and one is white, and both of them were quite big, and it is in Holland that they developed the orange carrots that we know today about this time. So even botanists can make comment about these pictures since they are encyclopedic in intention and so complex. And in a way, there's no interaction here between the personage is represented. If she's selling something, we don't see any buyers. There's kind of a kind of static presentation, let's say, of an accumulation of food. The theme begins to change when the painters, like here Peter Hasten, will introduce some personage in his presentation. I have two version of the same theme. It's called Christ and the Adulteress, because even if it's not evident at first sight, if you see on the foreground, of course, you have one of those market scenes like we have depicted before, but in the background, you have the religious scene who is there. You see, for instance, Christ writing on the ground. You see the inscription, you see it also here in the other version. One version is in Frankfurt, and the other there, to the right, is in Stockholm. But it's the same artist with the same theme of representing Christ and the adulteress. So as you know, in the gospel, you know the story, sometimes I have to recall these stories because we are not as religious as we used to be in my childhood. So bear with me if you know it already. But the scene described in Luke is the following. It is the Pharisees ask Jesus, okay, this woman was caught in the act, you see, as an adulteress. According to our law, we could stone her. What do you think? So he doesn't answer, and he writes on the floor an inscription that is the only indication in the gospel that Christ could write. Otherwise, we will not know. And so he writes something. We don't know what he wrote. And so the Pharisees ask again the same question, and finally the famous answer: the one who is without sin could throw him the first stone. And of course, nobody threw too much stones. Everybody disappeared, and so that was a good line. And so I think what is represented here is the second writing. After that he said that, you write again another inscription. And so if you see one and you see he's writing another one, so probably it's very Harston, who did this painting, I've read carefully his gospel, and he knows what he was doing. So, and he put that in the back. What is amazing here, of course, it is this juxtaposition of a modern scene with a religious theme who is not in the foreground, who is put behind like this. In both pictures, they occupied only the background of the picture, and give the preeminence, in the contrary, to this scene where people are dressed, of course, with costume contemporary to the painter, And the biblical figures are more or less in more ancient costume. You juxtapose both things. But what is interesting here, when I don't forget completely Krieghoff here, what is interesting here, it is the introduction of personage in the display. A certain interaction, let's say, between a personage that will be in the foreground, of course, in the Krieghoff picture. But you will see step by step how it's done. This is another of this Peter Harston picture, in which now the background scene is the opposition of the vita contemplativa and vita activa between Martha and Mary. You remember also this kind of opposition. Mary was sitting at the feet of Christ and listening to his talk and all this, and Martha found that was very too easy, and she was cleaning the floor and making all the let's say the household core there, and she complained about it, and she was answered, of course, Mary chose the best part, indeed. It was not too hard to discover. Anyway, so you see her here sitting and listening to Christ, and then here Martha complaining, of course, about how the floor is dirty and everything, all the things she had to do. And again, in the foreground, you have this display of food and of different fruits and vegetables. So these first type of scene, if you want, are built on this idea that first you have an enumeration of things, and not completely neutral, sometimes with some symbolic meaning. And then you have this introduction of these religious personages. The other step possible, it is, this is another, this is horrible. I will not leave it too long on the screen. It's called the butcher shop, and indeed, I think I have no doubt. But again, you see in the background, you have a scene there which seems not related to what we see in the foreground. It is a picture by Harston, again, Peter Harston. It's if my Dutch is not all right, it's A-E-R-S-T-E-N, if I spell it. And Peter Harston. So in the back, again, he put a kind of religious scene. We think it is the flight to Egypt of the Holy Family. And it will explain also the row of people that you have in the back. It is the recensement. How do you say that? The censor. The census, yeah, the census. You remember in the Bible, everybody goes to give their names and their address and all that. And after, of course, the Holy Family flew to Egypt. And so they are seen here. And here in the corner, you have a little poster in which it says, this land is for sale from here to further. And why he put that there? Because to oppose, let's see, the kind of detachment of the Holy Family for the land, with, in the contrary, the greed of people wanting to acquire more land. And it was seen as a kind of immoral at the time to be a kind of speculator on land. But it was beginning to be popular. You are at the beginning of capitalism there, and in Holland, and of course it was a popular thing. So in a way, he is, with all this accumulation of food, giving us also a little moral information. I stress that also because the first interpretation we had of these paintings were not stressing this aspect. This is a realistic view of life in the 17th century or 16th century in Holland. But as you could see by the type of commentary we can make now of these paintings by showing little details like that, they have also very often a kind of moralistic type of message to carry. They are not just a depiction of what we see, it's also a depiction of what should be. And this, in a way, it could give us a key to Krieghoff also. Krieghoff, you could see his painting as being a depiction of what he thinks is happening, but also it's always done with humor, with criticism, with a kind of tongue-in-the-cheek type of attitude in which you could find eventually a kind of distance of the painter with the realities depicting, maybe not to judge, maybe sometimes to take the side of what is represented against the authority, but always there is this kind of moral, in a very general sense, this kind of ethical type of preoccupation that you have in this painting. Then the other way to introduce personage also was to go toward mythology. This, of course, now you have a great artist, Jordans, who have, it's called something like I tried to translate in English. It is an allegory on homage to Pomona. Pomona is the goddess of fruit. In Latin, pomum means fruit. And she is in the middle, of course, of the picture. And behind her, you have this huge still life, let's say, like in the previous picture, associated maybe with the figure of a donator here, this nicely clad lady there among all these nude Bashik people. Is probably the donator, and you have, of course, all the god or the semi-god, let's say, associated to Bacchus, to the god of wine, the god of and then, okay, this is another way, or religious scene or mythological one, and it's finally the evolution will bring us much closer. The evolution of this market scene will bring us much closer to Krieghoff in the 17th century and toward the end of the 17th century. For instance, in a picture like this with Gabrielle Metsu. It represents an old woman selling fish in a market. And there, what is different from whatever we have seen up to now, it is first of all the people there are contemporary, they are not mythological, and they are not biblical figure. And then there is a real action happening there. It is a vendor with a buyer, and they are exchange of money to get the fish. You see, the servant here is giving money to the old lady that offer a certain amount of fish. And we are in a real place that could be depicted and all that. Then this is much closer to the Krieghoff Krieghoff painting that I was showing you. The anecdotal aspect, the contemporary aspect, and then you get, okay, your market scene, your trading scene, if you want, with a trader of a horse, but you get exactly the type of attitude that you will find in Krieghoff. Okay, this is a first point, let's see. If we go a little bit further, as I was mentioning, this kind of moralistic attitude, then again, I will try to do the same thing. I will show you a few pictures of Dutch origin and try to see how it fits with Krieghoff after. Let's say, for instance, at that moment, also in the 17th century, that we find many depictions of, let's say, a family life. And very often quite critical about what could destroy it or what could do it. This is a famous painting of Vermeer. It's called The Love Letter. And it's evident by the theme. You see the lady is stopping to play there. She just received a little letter from her servant, and she's quite worried because, of course, it's not from her husband. I guess she got this letter. She got it from her lover, and she doesn't know what will happen and all that. So, but what is fantastic in this picture, of course, Vermeer is such a great artist. It is the way, by the situation of the personage, let's say that way, he creates the idea that we are peeking into a very intimate type of space. The foreground is, in fact, almost too important, but it is as if there was a kind of door open, and not only that, there's a lot of obstacle on the way. You have, for instance, a broom, you have shoes on that, you have a kind of, say, disorder a little bit in the house. So as if, let's see, he protects a little bit these personages in the back. Of course, what she's worried about is symbolized also eventually by the painting behind her that shows a sail. And what is her little world could be destroyed, and she will have to go from there. Or anyway, so there is all the elements, of course, are always linked to this subject. Sometimes the way it's treated, it's much more crude than that. For instance, in this picture of Jan Steen, who is called The Dissolute Household, Steen was a good man, but he's known in the history to have been a landlord of an inn, not to say a tavern. And so he had the reputation to be a good drinker. Probably false anyway, but he have represented, and we think maybe he have represented himself in this type of picture. Here, the dissolute household, you have the parents are making all the sin possible. You see the mother is slumbering in alcoholic stupor, and the father is indulging with the very plentorous what they call it in Dutch, litmis. Litmis is not a nice miss. And you see his leg where it is. This is not nice. And of course, on the floor you have playing cards with the ace of heart. Of course, is there. This is a little kind of slate on which players put their marks, and there is an empty hat there to show the empty-headed people who are there, of course. And the kids are enjoying their freedom. You see, one is looking in the pocket of his slumbering mother. The other have already found a coin and is very happy. There's a little monkey here who steals time even. See, he plays with the clock there and stop the clock by holding the weight. And the dog also enjoy good Dutch cheese, all the sin possible, and also you have what could be expected against them. You see, there's le châtiment is there. Suspended above them, you have three things that we could identify more or less. There's a rattle, but the rattle was used by lepers in particular. So more or less what he's saying there, if you continue to live like this, this will happen to you. There is also a crutch of who is there, and finally this huge marmot, you see, in which they should clean their soul instead of just enjoying life like they do there, and to reform. So there, in a much more cruder way than in Vermeer, where it's always subtle and difficult to read, here you have in Jan Steen a kind of condemnation, if you want, of a bad household, and also an indication of the consequence of these bad performance. So this type of moralistic approach, you will see we have quite often in these Dutch painting, and of course we will have it also, you will see in Krieghoff. Peter de Hoer, we specialize in this kind of interior scene like this, but which represent rather, I would say, soldiers and indulging with girls. You have always kind of three sins who are represented. You have smoking. Is always very often suggested. For instance, in this personage, he holds a pipe. You have wine also, drinking. It's another sin, and flirting is the third one. And you will find them in different combination from one artist to the other. Here it's quite evident. The only personage who doesn't seem to be too much implied there is the servant in the back, who seems to be distracted. And also very often it's interesting to notice what is on the wall of this picture, because it completes this kind of moralistic thing. Here, if you, it's not very clear, but if you look carefully, you will see there's an old lady with a young one. The old lady have a book on her lap, and maybe beside there's a donator or something. What it is, it's probably the mother of the Virgin, Saint Anne, teaching. It's what we call education of the Virgin theme. So meaning that not every girl had Saint Anne as a mother. So that's why some are not behaving as they should. Yeah, very often this picture-in-picture are not chosen by hazard. They have a purpose. And it's not always clear, but here I think I'm not too far from what it should be suggested. Look, for instance, here by Terborg. Again, what is interesting, you see, is the complete ambivalence of this type of scene, of course. On the left, it's clearly, I would say, a bottrell scene, because you see a man giving money to a woman. and being quite close one to the other. Here, in the contrary, it's supposed to be the admonishation of a father to his daughter. But we have the impression that he took the same model or the same presentation and just changed more or less the title. Goethe used to like very much that picture. He didn't know the picture directly, but it was engraved, of course, and he could see an engraving of it. And I will try to read to you what he wrote about it, because after all, this Goethe is more eloquent than I can be. Who does not know Willie admirable engraving? So he referred not to the painting itself, but to an engraving by Willie of this picture. 1 foot thrown over the other sits a noble, knightly looking father. Well, he was before before the noble father. He was probably like this guy here before, because the type of attitude that you have to have your feet like this crossed in front of you is not normally what the decorum of the scene should ask. But you will see that Goethe excused him for that. His daughter stands before him, to whose conscience he seems to be addressing himself. She, a fine striking figure in a folding drapery of white satin, is only to be seen from behind. This is the daughter here. But her whole bearing appears to signify that she's collecting herself, that the admonition is not too severe, that she's not being utterly put to shame, is to be gathered from the air and attitude of the father. While the mother seems, as she was trying to conceal some slight embarrassment, she's looking into a glass of wine. You see, again, this is not what we expect in a scene like that. The mother was, oh yeah, everything is okay, we'll finish the drink. No, but what we think, he just took one of the scene like this that he was specialist in and decided to make a more moralistic type of picture. Here, I would say the ambivalence of the scene is at its maximum. Look, for instance, sometimes it's quite hard. Sometimes it's very crude, and sometimes it's quite hard to discover the meaning. Here with Jan Steen, of course, habitually it is quite explicit. You see guys who are laughing at a woman really in a horrible way. They suggest, for instance, look at the finger in the pipe there. I think it's evident. I don't want to scandalize any young people here, but I think this is quite evident. You have broken eggs. You have things here who have an erection. Anyway, all the and the laugh of the onlooker like this. I think it's very. So it's called a kind of tavern scene. Apparently, but look, for instance, with Vermeer, you will have more or less the same idea here, but it's treated in a completely different way. You see a woman smiling to us, offered a glass of wine by a gentleman who is very interested in what you know what, and here I said, okay, oh, there's a painting on the wall there. Maybe it will give me a key, but none. It's a portrait. But if you look in the stained glass there, it's very difficult to look. But if you see a detail of that, you will see a woman who holds a bridle for horse. And this is a classical representation of temperance. So in a kind of subtle way, Jan Steen put it very crude. All the symbolism is evident. You don't need to have, certainly not the imagination of Freud to find that. And but with Vermeer, it's always more subtle, but it's basically the same idea. The temperance is suggested in the stained glass there by this figure of a woman holding a bridle. Meaning that if you enjoy too much wine, and she seems, her smile seems that it's not the first glass she had. She's already a little bit enjoying life there. Okay, now be careful. The jump will be rough a little bit. I'm going to Krieghoff now. But yeah, the contrast is tough. But what is represented here, in fact? It's a kermesse scene, basically. It's a kind of popular type of enjoyment, let's say, and like a merrymaking, if you want. And Krieghoff have made many pictures on this theme, because probably there was also a good market for that. And to me, you have to situate it also in this type of double entente, you see. It's a representation of what he could have seen, but it's also, he's taking some distance with that and trying to show it in a humoristic way, a kind of depiction of the mores of the time, but also eventually even a criticism of it. Meaning that this moralistic aspect is never completely evacuated. Or to take side of this merry life, you see, against, for instance, the clergy who will condemn it, or in the contrary, to be with, say, if you go too far, you will have trouble and all that. So, first of all, this one is called Breaking Up a Country Ball in Canada, Early Morning. So it was 1857. It's a painting of the Thompson collection in Toronto. If you have seen the Krieghoff show that we had here at the McCord Museum 2 years ago, I think, many of the painting was coming from the Thompson collection. He had bought all the Krieghoff he could, had an amazing collection of it. This is one. And okay, so you have here the little poster, what is called Joli Fou Aubergiste. So it gives the name of an aubergiste, of a innkeeper of the time. And then amongst all the details, if you look at it, you will see we have everything. I have a nice description written by Ramsey Cook in the catalogue of Krieghoff, Image of Canada. If you want to read about Krieghoff, I think this is the most recent book on him, done by Dennis Reed and Ramsey Cook and myself when we had this exhibition in Toronto and now here at the McCord. Here is a riot of tipsy action combining in Bruegelesque fashion. He's right, it looks a little bit like Bruegel picture. Many of the familiar elements found in other Krieghoff painting. Colorful dress adorning bourgeois and habitants. Good Canadian horse, okay, that's prominent here, of course. Berlin and carriole, okay. Berlin is this thing here is upside down, where everybody falls on a poor pig who's there. I don't know if you can see it where you are, but there was two people running after a pig, and then suddenly the Berlin fall on him, you see. So probably the conductor was not in his right mind. And then this is the carriole. The carriole is more, it's a kind of more important type of voiture. Snowshoes. You have a personage who's tying them in the front. Barking dogs. Of course, dogs in Krieghoff are always barking. They are never quiet. And escaping pigs. Okay, is here. The last few drinks for the road. And hints of hangover to come. You have a man here sitting in the stairs, holding his head. He have already the hangover. He's not waiting for it, this one. And hints of hangover to come. Here was life and joy to the full, lacking, as Gérard Morisset will later complain, the spiritual element of these countrymen, but not less convincing at that. Yeah. What is this allusion to Morisset? Morisset is a French-Canadian art historian of great repute, and I have a lot of respect for him. He never liked Krieghoff. He always said, Krieghoff laugh at us, French-Canadian. He presents us in a kind of negative way. It was repeated by all the journalists. Of course, they like that, you see, to find some trouble. And but in fact, the interpretation of Morisset could be questioned. You know, this idea that our ancestors, meaning French-Canadian one, were very solemn people, were very religious, were always praying God and all that, the spiritual element. I think we were probably more close to that. And myself, I like to be associated to that instead of being always like this. Each one of his taste, but I have no problem with this. I like this. Okay, and wait a minute. I want to show in parallel some other, just to show you how that was a kind of popular theme for Krieghoff that he repeated. This one is called merrymaking, but it's exactly the same type of scene. And in 1870, when after a sojourn in the state, he came back to Quebec City, he treated again the same theme because he was popular because of that. And if you if you want to make a parallel with Dutch art, of course, a representation of happy kermesse type of painting, you will have as much as you want. Again, this is a Jan Steen picture, probably representing his own inn. As I told you, he was landlord of an inn, of a kind of tavern, and it's called the Hag Dance. I'm too far, but I think you see people in circle dancing, and of course, they were putting an egg on the floor, and the people, when they were too drunk, they were smashing the eggs, and everybody laughed. It's kind of, if it was as merry as that, he would certainly have a very prosperous inn. And this is, of course, a perfect parallel for Krieghoff, this type of, again, you could say, is it a kind of depiction of it? Or is it taking stand moralistically? What I suggest, I think it takes stand moralistically, but for this type of freedom, rather than against it. And okay, there is suggestion here of course, of drinking. This is the main theme, of course, of all these things. One thing that seems to be absent there is smoking. And in fact, we will find it in other type of picture, like this one, which is called a French-Canadian interior, a picture of around 1550, and I guess Krieghoff was proud of it. He had a lithograph made from it, not exactly, but let's say with the same theme, more or less. And you could see here smoking in its worst aspect. You see this man's blowing the smoke to the face of this woman, and in a French-Canadian interior, with, of course, the picture on the floor, on the wall, being a religious picture, and all the little details that you have. That numerous numerous family. This gesture of blowing smoke in the face of a woman is not neutral, as you can imagine. But again, I make the same mistake. For instance, let's see in a Jan Steen picture, you see that the suggestion not only that the woman drink too much, she hold a glass in her hand, you see where also, and the man is blowing smoke on her. It's very sexual in a way. And you have, for instance, in this engraving, almost the same attitude that you have in the Krieghoff picture. This is done by a not very known engraver who's called Jan van de Wiet. But I was interested in it because, indeed, it's exactly the same thing, and she have the same reaction of disgust, of course, that we have in the picture of Krieghoff. So you have wine, you have flirting, you have tobacco. Always the three sins, the three mortal sins of the time. Another thing is depicted by Krieghoff also and could be related to Dutch art of the time. It is card playing. And card playing, like you see here, this is a Krieghoff picture, accompanied, of course, with wine. And with smoking, they hold pipes in like the old man there, and also very often with somebody who is showing you the winning card and looking at the spectator. This is quite common in this type of scene, like in this beautiful picture of Latour, in which you see the trickster, the one who is dishonest, hiding a card behind his back like this, and this naive and rich boy not seeing exactly what's happening. There you have, of course, a courtesan here, a kind of a prostitute that is attracted to. You have the wine theme also. She serves a glass of wine. You don't have the tobacco, but it's always the three things. In the famous art historian Simon Schama, that I recommend you to read, his book is Embarrassment of Riches, about the Dutch culture, let's see, want us to believe that these three sins were typically Dutch. On this I can have difficulty to admit, but he says that even they were attributed to different group at the time. in Holland. For instance, the Jews had the tobacco industry in their hands, so they were associated to tobacco. The Catholic was famous drinkers. Why? Because they have the confession. This is a wonderful institution. You see, you drink your head off, and then you go to the priest and you tell him, I drink. He says, okay, my son, go and be forgiven. And then there were the remonstrant also, who were heavy smoker, and smoke goes with the devil, of course, and always this association. So the pastor, let's say, of the Dutch culture at the time were stressing this theme endlessly, that they were trying. And in a way, in Quebec, we had the same thing. This is the period where you had Monsignor Bourget, of course, the Catholic bishop of Quebec, decided that there was too much drinking in his diocese, and took a model on a French Monsignor, is called Monsignor Forbin-Janson of Nancy in France, who have created a movement of temperance. So what it was, they were going from village to village, having priests giving speeches, and how you have to stop drinking, throw the bottles away, and start a life of temperance, let's see. Sometimes they were giving also alcohol to pigs to show that the consequence, and of course everybody says this proves that you should not give it to the pigs. But, okay, so you had, there's a whole, one of the famous priests that will be involved in this campagne de tempérance that we have in Quebec at the time, exactly at the time when Krieghoff was doing this, is this Abbé Chiniki. That you have an engraving. There's few pictures. Apparently, Krieghoff made a portrait of him, but it has been destroyed, so we don't know exactly what it was. But it seems that he was interested by the personage. Chiniki was the vicar of Beauport, near Quebec, and he was very eloquent. And Monsignor Bourget liked his style and all that, even if he was a little bit rough and a huge guy like this, shouting and everything. But he wanted to have him in Montreal, and so he got in Longueuil, and he decided, and began to make his campaign of tempérance. If we had left him do it endlessly, we will be all dry. He was very, very popular. People stopped drinking and everything. And see, he was like a real successful orator, and he knew how to speak to his people and all that. Sometimes there was some criticism about him because he decided, because he worked so hard, that he should not make all the penance of Lent, for instance, and you should eat meat even on Friday and things like that. So people complain, and Monsignor Bourget sent him a letter, if you can, don't brag too much about your good health, because of course you don't follow the rules like everybody, so that's why you are so healthy. But it's a kind of personality. To me, astonishingly, Father Chiniki was such a moralistic person, finally abandoned priesthood, get married, become a Protestant, and end up in the United States. So I think it's one of the reasons why his portrait disappeared. People who admire him after find him despicable and they destroy the portrait. It's very possible that this was the context. Anyway, this is just to give you a little bit the context. The other theme, okay. Basically, when you think of it with a little bit of distance, you will say what Krieghoff seems to be interested in, it's infringement of interdiction, to see the limit of the law, if you want, and to question it. And you could say, take the sides of the French Canadians who were oppressed by this very heavy Catholic Church, you see, with a lot of rules and with tempérance and everything that people didn't like much, and he took the side of the little people, if you want. I think more or less what happened. Another interdiction also, on which you could see denounced in his picture, is here, in series of pictures that he made on the toll gate. So what happened, it is at the time, the landlord of each piece of land were obliged to take care of the road that passed through their land. And of course, they decided that this was too expensive, and they wanted to impose to create tolls to stop the traffic and ask money to help them to build these roads. Okay, this is nice if you have 2 or 3 tolls, but if you have 100 of them, it's terrible. So people revolted against that, especially that there was a category of people who were not paying the tolls, like priests, like lawyers, like doctors, and owners of restaurants, things like that. They were free to, they had a special bill to protect them for that. So finally, it was the little people who pay all the time, the farmers. And here, well, the speed they went, they went through the toll without paying. And here on the house here, you have, of course, the fare, what you are supposed to pay and everything. But here, they just make like this to the owner and goes further. So again, it is the infringement of interdiction that is suggested here. It's, I think, it's certainly one of the preoccupations of Krieghoff, and in which you could see now more the relation with the Dutch tradition. How this kind of, we are interested in mores, but we are interested also to judge them, to not only to depict them, but to take stand, to see. The other big question that we have to ask about Krieghoff also, it is, I would say, the question of the form. Up to now, I've deal only with the subject matter, with the iconography, if you want. But how this is organized, how his Krieghoff will create this type of scene, what is the implication here? First thing that we have to realize is dealing with emotion. Is dealing with emotion, of course, habitually not sad emotion. It could be funny, it could be, but nevertheless, what he expects from his onlooker, from the spectator, is a certain emotive reaction to it. We could laugh, we could cry, we could enjoy it, we could detest it, but we are not supposed to be just onlooker, very neutral like this. And in a way, Krieghoff is astonishing on that. For instance, we always associate him with this kind of fun, loving, and all that. But if you see his own self-portrait, and even photo of him taken by Livernois, like you see on the right side, he doesn't look like a very funny man. He looks, in the contrary, like very severe, very intense, like a romantic artist, I would say, who see more deeply in the soul of man. And he gives really a picture of himself like somebody who see more than what the common people can see. And so that means this theme of the emotion are important for him. It could be more dramatic like here, it could be habitually more kind of joyful type of emotion, but the problem will be that how do you translate emotion in such a way, with such power, let's say, that you the onlooker, the spectator, will get inside of the picture, will be captivated by it, and you will have a kind of rapport like this with him. Sometimes Krieghoff represented himself in a more neutral way. It's him who is here in this picture. Where is my little red thing? Okay, here. You see, he have represented him trying to negotiate with 2 hunters and their Indian guide this very picture that represent a sunset, and with a moose, probably a female moose because she doesn't have a horn, to depict this scene that he's negotiated with them, which is interesting in a way because it's as if he shows the scene that he wants to depict, like a double niveau. There, he represents himself like a serious artist, committed to his work, since he is able to go even in the middle of winter to make his picture. But on the other hand, he's not nor funny nor sad. He's just trying to get information. So sometimes you will have portrait of Krieghoff like this. The best example I know to show how Krieghoff have determined, let's say, the way to build this picture and to deal with this more formal aspect that I want to stress now, it is these 2 pictures called Breaking Lent. Okay, the iconography is clear. It is the vicar. It could be Shiniki for all I know. Come here. Suddenly, in the middle of a meal, let's say on Lent, but probably on Friday, where everybody is eating meat. And so it's kind of catastrophe, of course, for everybody. You see this man seems very not proud of what he's doing. The whole grandmother is really completely mad. The dog here is very happy because the man make disappear this côtelette de porc, like I don't know what. The lady here hide this one under a plate, and you have another lady in the back who is looking what's happening. And he seems to be absolutely, the priest seems to be angry, up to really burst and tell them what he thinks. The same scene have been repeated in the other picture with some variation. But if you think in terms of, okay, this emotion that you want to translate, I would see the solution is theatrality. It's to show the scene as if you were in the theater. And indeed, if you think of it, here you have a kind of decor. The foreground is completely empty in order that you will not miss anything. And you have two set of doors, let's say one on this side, one on the other side, like you have very often in theater. And then the interaction of the personage will be so intense that in a way they will make you believe that they are not aware that you are looking at them. This is very important, this definition of theatrality as such. Let's say the interaction between all the personages is so intense that the onlooker is excluded from the scene. Nothing will be more contrary to that than to have one of the, let's say, the personage here looking at you and making face or pretending to be part of the game. No, in a good scene of theater, in a good play, let's say, the personage seems so involved in each other that they make you believe that they forget about your presence. And the one who have defined this type of absorption and theatrality, this kind of mixture of absorption and theatrality, the best is Diderot. Diderot, in his famous art criticism, have exactly explained that. And for him, the model of that was not, of course, Krieghoff, but he was interested, let's say, in Jean-Baptiste Greuze. Greuze is a French artist of the 18th century, a romantic artist, and this is the departure of the prodigal son. And it is exactly what I was telling you. He says, Diderot explained in this type of picture what happened. It is that Greuze have chosen a moment of such intensity, let's say, that it's evident that all the personages there could not care less of you who are outside of the picture. What happened? It is the son, the bad son, let's say, who quit his family. The father wanted to curse him. The people tried to stop them. Everybody is involved in the thing. The only one who is less involved, maybe, it is the friend who's there, who's waiting for him to go to have his bad life after. So Greuze's picture have this intensity, like Michael Fried, who have written beautifully about this thing. He speak about the Diderot interpretation, but he speak of a kind of a single collective act of heightened attention. So what is depicted there? A kind of a single collective act, because many people are involved, but of attention, but who have been brought at such a level that the onlooker doesn't exist anymore. As if you want also, you could say that the picture is sealed in itself. There's no, the picture is complete in itself. It excludes the spectator completely, like what the drama should be, and like Diderot says, not like bad theater should be. Bad theater will, in the contrary, try to make contact with the people. This is my type of theater, so I'm always trying to but good theater will not do that. Drama on the scene will make you, will give you the impression that you assist to something that you are not involved with, say that you are at distance. So this theatrality and this absorption of the persona, you could find in Krieghoff, of course, not in this type of tragic mood that you have there. The emotion that Krieghoff is dealing with are not tragic like here. But nevertheless, you could say it's emotion too. I'll try to. For instance, the load, bargaining for a load of wood here, 1860 of Krieghoff. Okay, you could say it's like a scene also. It's like a theater. The house, the tree, the background here are like the decor. And the foreground is empty, exactly like to really liberate the scene that we could see. And then the interaction of the personage is such that they forget about you in a way. You have this man who wants to sell his wood to this habitant here, and you have his wife who's looking aside. Even, I would say, the chicken are involved. The horse is fed up to wait there. He begins to go like this. So all the personages are involved in their action like this, and the presentation is like a theater. The fact that the background is almost parallel to the plane of the picture also is typical of that. It's just as if you have a theater. The main idea, of course, is this absorption, let's say, of the personages between themselves. One defect, of course, of this picture and why they age so badly, and I would say more the tragic picture of Greuze than the comic one. I would say comedy age less fast than tragedy. Greuze, with time, we find it a little bit too emphatic and too ridiculous in a way. Say, for instance, this example. I will not learn. L'accordé du village. Where each of the personages is almost caricature. You see, he wants so much to stress, say, the type of each personage that you have something that seems a little bit incongruous. For instance, okay, the young couple is there in the middle. You have the notarion here who is writing the documents and all that. The father, well, how can he have such a nice daughter at his age? He's really at the brim of the tomb, and maybe this marriage will put the last nail. And the mother here looks like a sales lady of fish, you know, that's a kind of poissonnière, a little bit. Anyway, all the age are represented. You have old age, and you have adulthood, fresh adulthood. The girls look like a little Parisienne, but who are supposed to be in a kind of rural house. And the children, and everything is so typified like this, in order to create this type of involvement between the personage that the danger is you fall in a kind of caricature, or it can be funny. But with comedy, it's okay. If you want to be funny, in the first place, there's not too much problem with this. And I think it's what's happening with. You will be very pleased when I will comment this picture. This is exactly another horse trading, say like the one I showed you in the beginning, where you see the horse and you see the wife and the trader who tried to show money and all this. Will you accept this money for your horse and all that? The whole grandfather is looking. Everybody is involved in this little scene. Even the horse seemed a little bit ashamed. You remember dans les carnets of Major Thompson, it is said this phrase, never discuss the price of a horse in front of the horse. And that's what they are doing there. And the horse, I think this beautifully Brit, this idea. So of course, it's comedy, but you do have always this kind of little... this effect of absorption of the personage and the theatrality of it. The last theme that I wanted to discuss about Krieghoff, it is the Indian theme, of course. As you know, he has depicted also a lot of his painting, maybe 450 something, according to John Russell Harper, are on Indian theme. And at first I said, why he's so interested in that? Why he was attracted to this? And in a way, you could explain it by his German upbringing. For Germany, the forest is a very, how can I describe it? Is a very kind of positive type of environment. And it is linked to their history. Germania, like Tacitus described it, was covered with forests, and their first heroes, let's say at the time of the Roman time, like men like Arminius or Hermann, if you want, in German, they succeeded to beat the Roman legionnaire by attracting them in the forest. And there is the famous legionnaire, the Roman legionnaire Varus, who lost his battle and committed suicide, and all his army was decimated by the German tribes at the time. It is a kind of a highlight of their history that make the forest like a very positive type of place. And for instance, in this picture of Aldofer, who is called St. George and the Dragon, you see the scene is minuscule in a way with this huge tree behind. You have St. George here on his horse, and the dragon who looks rather like a big frog. And he dispatch him like this with the lance, you know. The dragon have no hope to survive in such a surrounding. The forest will protect St. George. It's there where we triumph. And okay, so the inhabitant of the forest, meaning the Indians, will be then seen as, for Krieghoff, I think he will have a kind of sympathy to them. If Flaubert says La Bovary c'est moi, I think Krieghoff says Les Indiens c'est moi. He felt, okay, he was partly marginal in his own society, if you want, but also because of this upbringing in Germany, I think this association with forest, people of the forest, this freedom will interest him, and you will see that he will develop this. Bon, finally. You see, for instance, this is quite typical also of the approach of Krieghoff to this theme. He represents forests, but also like a place of history, like a place where we transform the forest into something else. He will show himself also drawing. This is one of the rare comment on his own heart, I would say, showing this beautiful forest, but also with the remnant of some human settling there. This is and so when he will deal with the Indians, it will be at first, I would say the very first picture he does are in a way quite realistic. It is what you see in the street of Montreal at the time. Indian woman trying to sell a moccasin like you see here, and she's in front, in fact, of his studio. This is his address here. So this is something that he could have seen, and he doesn't give her any specific expression, so we don't know too much what he thinks. And at first, okay, he's fascinated. This is the people who come to him in a way in the city, trying to survive. He's not, but then it doesn't correspond, of course, to the romantic idea that he have of them. And he will build picture like the one you have on the right, in which from this type of observation, he will combine a few of them together and to create a kind of, again, a little theater of these people speaking together and being completely involved in each other and ignoring, of course, us. See, the same system that I was describing before, but applied now to this theme. He will also, from time to time, try to recreate completely from imagination scene that he thinks will be quite typical of their life. For instance, it's evident that if you look at this huge man here, say if he was standing, he will never enter the tent there, and his wife will have to look at him like this all the time. So it's evident that these personages were taken from engraving. It's like a collage, if you want. In the country there, I think it is a collage also, but it's a collage done with his own observation, and not with previous picture done before by other painters. And, well, it's called Indian encampment and all that, but you see that he tried to reconstruct what he thinks is their real life. Here is the same. It's very erudite in terms of the plants who are represented, the forests and all that, but the Indians, the costume are okay and everything, there's no problem with that, but the scene is recreated probably from engravings or from other sources. Like here you see, this is a kind of lithograph version of a similar painting of this one with a dog and the four people speaking together. Maybe one looking at us, but again, always close, always difficult to interpret. And finally, when he will be installed in Quebec, he will make these famous pictures with Indians in a wonderful type of landscape. Krieghoff is one of the first to have dealt with the color of autumn in Canada. This was not evident. The one who tried before Thomas Davis, people like that, some of the topographers tried to do this, but Krieghoff really got the feeling of this. And he have made then a real kind of Indian encampment, and maybe one of most mysterious picture. It is a night picture. This was one of the revelations of the exhibition. I never seen before a Krieghoff painting by night, painting night picture, but it is indeed a very romantic type of theme also to paint people in the middle of the night with the moon and with this kind of éclairage, you see, of lighting of just a little fire in the foreground. Okay, I don't want to develop this too much. I wanted to mention, of course, this Indian picture in Krieghoff because they are part of his outpouring. I think what we should remember and about my theme of realism, you see, in a way, the problem with realism, it is that painters don't define reality the same way. In the Dutch tradition, reality is also confronted to ideality. You have reality, the word comes from res in Latin, who means la chose, the thing. But ideal, it is, of course, coming from idea, but idea not only a kind of representation of what we see, but eventually a representation of what should be. And in that sense, you have a kind of concept of reality that could be also have symbolic implication. And I think, in a way, Krieghoff is a good example of that. He did with what he learned in Europe before coming first in United States and then in Canada. He learned this type of art in which, okay, you could depict what you see, you could try to reconstruct a scene as accurately as possible, but art should not stop there. You should do more than that. You should also suggest eventually a more idealistic type of content. Okay, so next time we will deal with Paul Kane. You will see, I think, more or less involved with the concept of history, of depicting the past, depicting things of history. Thank you for your attention.